Hello, everyone. Welcome to today's panel. I'm your moderator, Roshni Advani. Today, we're going to be going over the 2025 in-house compensation results, survey results, and I would be remiss to not give a shout out to some of the folks that have worked on our survey this year and compiling the results. So thank you to David, Hamilton, Vincent, Sherman, Marty, Gabe, Krithi, and Susan. Now I'm going to go ahead and introduce myself and our panelists. So my name is Roshni Advani. I'm corporate counsel at Workday. And I'm going to go ahead and introduce our first panelist. So first, I would like to bring in Angela. Angela is a seasoned executive research professional with over 2 decades of experience in corporate recruiting, consulting, and banking. She most recently served as head of executive recruiting at Uber, where she led talent acquisition for mobility, delivery, core services, and corporate functions. Her expertise in executive search spans the technology and financial services sectors, honed through leadership roles at Heidrick & Struggles, Monte Rosa, Barclays Global Investors, and BlackRock. Angela's background also includes investment banking and strategy consulting, providing her with a unique perspective on leadership needs. She holds degrees from Wellesley College and Harvard University. Thanks for joining us today, Angela. Next, I'm going to go ahead and introduce Herman G., another one of our panelists. Herman is a talent acquisition specialist with nearly 25 years of experience in the life sciences sector. Herman is currently part of the talent acquisition team at Exelixis, a leading oncology therapeutics company where he has supported significant company growth through strategic recruitment across all departments. Prior to joining Exelixis, Herman honed his experience at Egon Zehnder International, where he led research and clinical searches for a global client base of biotech, pharmaceutical, and med device companies. He holds a bachelor's degree in molecular biology from UC Santa Cruz. Go Slugs! And thank you, Herman, for joining us. Next, and last but not least, I'm going to introduce Susan Tien. Hey, Susan. Hi. Thanks for joining us. So Susan is a leading recruiter for in-house legal talent. She conducts searches for top employers ranging from venture-backed startups to Fortune 500 companies. She graduated from Harvard College and UPenn Law. She was an associate at Wilson Sonsini and served as in-house counsel at Silicon Valley companies such as eBay and SGI. Susan also, by the way, co-authored the career guide, Conquering Corporate America for Women and Minorities in 2003. So we are very lucky to have Susan as a panelist today. Not only is she a panelist, but she also helped out with putting the report together. So thank you, Susan, and all of our panelists for joining us today. Let's dive in to the meat of what we're going to be talking about today, which is the results of the in-house compensation survey. First, I want to get a little bit into the typical profile of a respondent for this survey before I show you the actual results of what the survey demonstrated. Ezra, if we can get to the respondent profile slide. Thank you so much. Perfect. So let's talk about what a typical respondent looked like for this survey. So we received a total of almost 250 responses. Almost 80% of the respondents identified as Asian American, with a majority identifying as female, about 57%. And 100% of our respondents had either a JD or its equivalent and were based in the Bay Area. We had a pretty wide distribution across different practice areas, different types of titles and levels, years of experience, different industries, and lastly, across, between public and private companies, with a majority of our respondents working at public companies, about 60% of those folks. Let's next talk about the different years of experience in their careers that our respondents generally had. So our years of experience here was actually pretty well spread out. The majority of our respondents had between 11 and 15 years of experience. But as you can see here, we had 26% in that bucket, 19 and 24 in the other two buckets, with a small percentage of respondents outside of that bucket as well. Let's get to next the different types of roles that our respondents held or hold, I should say. So most of the folks that responded to our survey this year are in a senior counsel position, followed by being an associate general counsel or deputy general counsel. I should say associate or assistant general counsel. Next slide, please. And we'll talk about the different primary work locations of our respondents. So we asked this to be broken down by county, but what you'll actually see is that the top work location was remote. So compared to our last survey that we did 2 years ago in 2022 and 2023, at that time, we saw that there were about 29% of respondents that were working remotely full time. And now we're seeing about almost 45%. I'm personally curious to see how this is going to shift in the next couple of years, as I know a lot of companies are implementing return to office policies. So that'll be something interesting to check out in the next couple of years. Now that we're done talking a little bit about what our respondents looked like, let's talk about the different types of companies that those respondents are working at. So in this slide, you're going to see the most commonly represented industries. So as you can see, by far, most of our respondents are in the technology industry, and followed by biotech and pharma. But by far, most of those folks were in the tech industry. Next, let's talk about the different revenue of the companies that our respondents work for. Majority of our respondents work for $1 billion plus companies. And this is a noticeable change from our last report, where a third of respondents worked for small companies with less than 500 employees. So either there's a shift here, or maybe we didn't get the same pool of respondents. We'll see. And we're going to ask our panelists in just a moment. I'm going to stop talking and get to some questions soon. But before I do that, I do want to share with you the next slide, which has to do with the compensation analysis. Let's get into what you all came here for, which is going to be the results of the survey. So in Ezra, I think, can we go to the base compensation slide, please? Thank you. So let's talk a little bit about base compensation. In this slide, you're going to see two charts. I know there's a lot on the screen, but the top chart is indicating the 2024 and 2025 base compensation. And the bottom chart shows the results from the last survey, which was conducted in 2022 and 2023. The 50th percentile here is considered the average. And so we've broken these results down, as you can see, by different years of experience. I want to pose our first question for our panelists here. You know, after the layoffs that we've seen happen in 2023 and 2024, we expected base compensation to drop. And it looks like that did in fact happen for junior attorneys with less than 7 years of experience, and also for most of the junior and senior attorneys who changed jobs within the last year. But at the same time, the median base salary rose for attorneys with 7 or more years of experience. I'm wondering if, Herman, you could share with us what you have seen in your experience and what your forecast is going forward for what base compensation will continue to look like.
Sure. I mean, when you're at the 7 to 10 years mark, that can be indicative of someone who is, you know, in or approaching, let's say, a middle management or a senior management role, like associate director, director, or senior director. And those positions are really not just tactical, but also, you know, encompass maybe strategic thinking and leadership, maybe leading, you know, a couple of direct reports. And those are, you know, coveted skills, and obviously you would be compensated more for that. So I could see why that rose, because again, more experience, again, management position, strategic as well as tactical. So in terms of, you know, what the market will look like, there'll always be a need for management, especially at the higher level positions. You know, even if there are, you know, reduction in forces, there'll always need for that type of direction and leadership within any type of company. So I, personally think that compensation will remain strong. I don't see it dropping, at least steady, or increasing, depending on the type of role, the company, and the skill set of the candidate.
Interesting. Let's get into that a little bit more on the next slide, where I'd like to dig in a little bit further to the analysis of the survey results. On this slide, you all can see the difference between the base salary for individuals who changed jobs in the last year on the bottom chart versus the same chart that you saw on the last slide, which encompasses all survey respondents. And I want to pull in some of our panelists here again to help us understand what's going on here. So what I can see is that the base compensation dropped for most junior and senior lawyers who changed jobs within the last year. Can you, maybe we can start with Susan here. Can you help me understand what's going on here? Why are we seeing that the base salary is dropping for folks who have changed jobs in the last year?
So it has to do with supply, demand, and leverage. So especially the junior and the senior people. The junior people probably don't have enough experience. The senior people are often capped, especially if the hiring manager has fewer years, then they don't see that they need that many years of experience. So then you see the big medium level, they got increases as the market improved. But if you don't have leverage and there's like less demand and there's a lot of supply at your level, that's what accounts for the drop. The other things to think about for job changers is what kind of internal equity is at the hiring company. So if the hiring company thinks that, we're only paying this much across the board, they're going to stay tight within the range. So that's just another factor affecting pay for people changing jobs.
Okay, interesting. Angela, did you have anything to add on this one?
Yeah, I would just reiterate what Susan was saying. I think that in these tighter times, right, there's going to be a focus on parity within the peers at the current, because you want to hold on to the good people, but bring in, of course, strength. And I think the people that will see an increase is if you are passive and it is the company reaching out to you that will motivate them to incentivize you beyond the role, responsibility, the different company. This is the final lever that they have, right, to attract you.
I see. Okay. Well, why don't we all jump into some more analysis of the results, and then I want to loop back around with you all to see what your thoughts are about the rest of what we have. Let's talk about the next slide now. On this slide, you will see the average base salary at a tech and life science company compared to other companies, which here we've written it as non-tech, but it means non-tech and non-life sciences. So you can see here that the base salary in those non-tech roles is significantly lower. Similarly, on the next slide, we've now drawn a contrast between the base salary in a tech company compared to the base salary for folks within the life sciences industry. And here you see that for lawyers with 7 or more years of experience, the median base compensation at both tech and biotech and pharma companies are pretty much relatively similar. Let's talk about something other than base salary for a moment here. Let's get into bonuses. So on the next slide, you'll see that the actual versus the target bonus that folks received was pretty similar at the 50th percentile, except you see a little bit of difference at the 0 to 3 years of experience and a little bit at the 4 to 6 years of experience. And I want to break this down a little bit more on the next slide. Let's break it down next by race, by the different race that our respondents indicated that they identify with. So as you can see in this slide, I thought this was pretty interesting here, and I want to ask our panelists about this in just a moment. But interestingly, non-Asian American respondents in their 0 to 3 years of experience category and in the 7 to 20 years of experience categories, both made more in their bonus in the 50th and 75th percentile than their Asian American counterparts. So I thought that was pretty interesting because bonus is usually qualitative and it requires input from managers. I will note, though, that the sample sizes here were not equivalent. So that's another thing to kind of caveat this. On the next slide, you'll see another aspect of compensation, getting, kind of staying on the bonus topic, but let's talk about signing bonus. So here you'll see that 34% of our respondents did receive a signing bonus. 25% of them actually successfully negotiated that signing bonus. But at the same time, it seems like timing matters here because of the folks that changed jobs last year, only 9% of those folks received a signing bonus. So I will pull in some of our panelists here to help us break down some of this data. I have a couple of questions here, and I'm wondering if we could maybe start with Angela. Angela, can you help us understand? I have a couple of questions. So what is the role of a signing bonus, and why have only 34% of our respondents received one? Do you recommend that we should always ask for signing bonuses when we're considering a new job opportunity? And lastly, what different factors could a candidate mention when they're asking for a signing bonus that would maybe be most compelling to you as a recruiter?
Yeah, I think, it never hurts to ask in any of the, areas of the compensation. What I would preface that with is try and really understand the compensation philosophy of the company, as well as what they typically would use to justify a signing bonus. So oftentimes the recruiter will be relatively open, right? They're trying to find something that works for everyone. So if you could spend some time up front just understanding what would be justified, what would make that they could easily justify giving you a signing bonus, then you can provide them with the rationale and explanation to facilitate that. Having the just because isn't something in this market that is really going to work. So understanding that and the philosophy of the company, and also if you have any friends who have been who recently joined and you're comfortable asking, find just getting those data points so that you don't go in blind.
Yeah, that's a great point. Herman, did you have anything to add on this signing bonus slide?
Yeah, so as Angela said, compensation philosophies can differ amongst companies. The part about where some received a signing bonus, some did not. I know with at Exelexis, a signing bonus is intended to help try to close the gap if, let's say, a candidate is leaving something behind with their current employer, let's say a bonus, right? Or stock that's vesting next 3 to 6 months. It would be helpful, especially during the negotiation period, to bring those matters up, right? And kind of use that to your advantage as a candidate and leverage that. Sign bonuses can also be used to, obviously make the overall package more attractive. 2 years ago when the market was extremely hot and we had trouble, attracting candidates, we really had to elevate our game by offering, sign-on bonuses, in addition to competitive, base salaries. Sometimes we can't increase the base salary. We'll maybe try to loop on a, higher sign-on bonus. So that's the philosophy with my company in those signing bonuses. So it helps to be transparent, especially around the negotiation time and sharing those details.
Yeah. Interesting. So what I've heard so far and what I've seen so far is that there's a couple different aspects to a compensation package. We've talked about base salary. We've talked about bonuses. We've now talked a little bit about signing bonuses. And I now want to kind of shift our focus. Let's move on to the next slide where we can talk a little bit about equity, which is another big aspect of a compensation package. On this slide, you can see that equity was one of the top successfully negotiated components of a compensation package. And we saw about a 40% success rate in negotiating equity. But annual equity grants have dropped compared to our last survey in 2022 and 2023. That's a typo there. Where the 50th percentile at that time ranged from 25,000 to 60,000 for lawyers with all sorts of years of experience, whereas now it's between 0 and about 16,500. I'm curious here if our panelists, maybe I can go back to you, Herman, on this one. Can you make any comments about this and about, negotiating equity? It's one of the things that I definitely consider when I'm looking at a company or an offer, and I'd be curious to know what your tips are for negotiating equity.
Yeah, so obviously, everyone's situation is going to be different and companies have, again, different philosophies. But I think what's important to recognize if you're a candidate is, what is your current situation? So if you're currently unemployed, honestly, you have less negotiating power. Unless you have multiple offers or you have a rare skill set that's now highly sought, or you're being pursued or actively recruited for a senior leadership role. If you are currently employed, then again, as I mentioned earlier, there are some things that can leverage in your favor. You have vesting equity in the next 3 to 6 months, right? And share that valuation. If you have a significant sign-on bonus that leaving behind, and maybe the company isn't going to be able to give you as much cash, that can be leveraged in your favor too. And then it's also, what is the company that you're being considered a job for? Like, what's their status situation? Are they a private company or a startup that's not IPO? Those companies may have more flexibility in their equity structure, right? Let's see, for example, they're giving a lower base salary, but they give a lot more shares, right? Tens of thousands, right? That's projected to be valued at a great number in the long or near-term future when they do become public. Those type of companies are also trying to, preserve their cash. And again, there may be some more give with, negotiating equity. If it's like a publicly traded company, well, those institutions are not going to have a established equity structure, right? And it's based on seniority or grade level. And there may be a little more rigid, right? And there may not be as much flexibility in negotiation. But as I said, be transparent with the recruiter when it's around negotiation. Share what you think or what you would like, and justify why. Again, what are you leaving behind with your current employer? Those are really been the key things in my experience, in how candidates have been able to negotiate their equity package.
Interesting. Okay.
Yeah.
So,
and then, sorry if I can add one thing.
Ahead.
There may be other aspects of the total compensation package or offer package. Sometimes there are stock refreshers and other long-term incentives. There may be promotional equity awards too. So think about that and ask that early up front, so you know where the possibilities that you can negotiate. Ask if you can negotiate that. But if you see some other areas of compensation that are a plus to you outside of equity, then you may consider, asking for less equity and seeing other areas that they can increase in.
Yeah. Interesting, Herman. And that was a perfect segue into what I was going to take us to next, which is actually going to talk a little bit about an equity refresh. So on this slide, we, kind of saw what an annual equity grant looked like, but let's talk about an equity refresh. And some folks received it and some folks didn't. As we can see here, about nearly half, about 45% of folks who received equity from their companies also received an equity refresh. So just to break this slide down a little bit as well, this data reflects an initial equity grant. This data reflects the equity refresh. And the way that we asked respondents to break this down was, if your grant was, for example, $100,000 over 4 years, we asked folks to divide that figure by 4 and then only list $25,000, for example. So here, as we're seeing at a nearly 45% success rate, equity was the second most successfully negotiated component in total compensation, where base compensation was the first most successfully negotiated component. And about those same 45% of folks that received equity, like I said, also received an equity refresh. So I think we've covered kind of some of the typical components that a candidate might think of when they're thinking of compensation package. We've talked about base salary, bonuses, and equity. But there's a lot more that at least I would consider when looking at an offer from a company. What is my lifestyle going to look like when I might work there? So I want to talk on the next two slides about some of the other top benefits that folks are receiving at their companies. So as you can see here, we've got the 401k match, we've got paid maternity, or I should say parental leaves. Are your professional memberships paid for? Do you get unlimited PTO? These kinds of things. So here on this slide, you can see a lot of folks are receiving these types of benefits, and there are so many benefits that it actually spills over into the next slide, where you can see an additional list of the top benefits that folks are receiving as well. So here's another place where I'd actually like to pull in our panelists, because we did talk about those four other components earlier, but I'm seeing a lot more things listed here, and I would like to take advantage of all of them as an attorney working for a company. So can I pull maybe Susan in here? And Susan, can you tell me what kind of benefits do you suggest that we negotiate when we're receiving a job offer? And also, when is the right time for me to bring up a benefits package and get more information about all these types of benefits?
A lot of the benefits are set in stone. It's set by HR. I would say the few areas that you could ask for would be things with managerial discretion, like say you're a privacy person, you want to go to the IAPP conference or something, or like you're a corporate securities person, you need to go to the corporate securities event. You certainly should ask for it. And if you had it at your old company, I think that's helpful. Whether you're going to get it or not, I don't know, but it would be treated, fairly, as long as you ask nicely. And then your question on timing, like if you have a burning question about, like, say, medical, you can always ask, like, oh, can I have your fact sheet on it? And then HR usually has a little PDF, and no one thinks badly of anyone for asking for simple things. For remote, if it's super important to you, you might want to ask. You might want to just get clarity about it. Like, oh, how many people work from home? How does it work? I wouldn't start with any demands there to begin with, because you might get X'd immediately. And it might be too bad for you, because should you have the whole dance and have them fall in love with you, they might be able to move. But if you raise it too fast, too hard, that's a problem. So those are some initial thoughts. I know Angela also had some views too on this.
So I would say, in terms of location, be upfront. If you need to work from home 2 days a week due to personal situation, just be upfront about it, and then you'll get the spiel on what the policy is, right? And that's something certain managers are more flexible than others, and the recruiter will often, depending on what the candidates are looking at and knowing the hiring manager, know that it's already a no-go, and it's not in anyone's best interest to continue. Or to keep them in mind if things change. But most of the stuff, like Susan said, is set in stone. There's no harm in being upfront and asking for the benefits for sure. It's, like she said, PDF'd, it's official. There's not much room. So oftentimes I'm more than happy to send that out. Mm-hmm. But yeah, I would say location-wise, people have asked up front about potential transportation. Right at Uber, we had Uber Cash that you could use for rides. We also had a shuttle. So that was something that the recruiter would, be gladly send out the schedule on and the routes, because it is an important part, right, of showing up if the policy is you need to be in the office 2 to 3 days a week or more.
Got it. Okay. Well, interesting. It sounds like there are some of these benefits that we might be able to ask about, but a lot of them might already be set in stone and there's not much we can do about it. So I'm curious to know your thoughts about the next slide, actually, which is a summary of the trends that we saw throughout our in-house compensation survey report. Just to go through them quickly, since our last report in 2022 and 2023, the base compensation generally went up, but signing bonuses and median equity valuation dropped. Recent job changers had less leverage. They received fewer signing bonuses, and most junior and senior lawyers received a lower base compensation. Annual bonus, often based on qualitative feedback, interestingly skewed lower for Asian American attorneys in their 0 to 3 and 7 to 20th years compared to non-Asian American lawyers. I want to dig into that a little bit too. Non-tech industries pay a lower base in general. And lastly, we also saw that median base pay for experienced attorneys was similar between tech and life sciences companies and between public and private companies. So these were some of the trends that we saw throughout our report. And so I actually would be interested to hear from each of our panelists, and in no particular order, but I'd be interested to hear from each of you about what your thoughts are about these report trends. Are they kind of what you were anticipating, or is there anything surprising here? And I'll turn it over to our panelists to kind of tell us their thoughts here.
Oh, I can start on, I was surprised that base went up a little, but especially because the media was publishing reports all through last year with all the layoffs that tech pay was dropping. But Levels FYI just came out with their current report and said tech has gone up between 5 and 10% in base. And that is what we're seeing here. And then you can also see that job changers, though, did get hit. So it surprised me, but I can understand why that happened. So that's on the first point. And then you can see why signing bonuses went down was because it's usually the last thing to close someone. So with supply and demand off, you don't need to use that lever as much. So it wasn't used by the employer.
That makes sense.
You can comment, I mean, just to piggyback on your comments, because I mean, 22, 23, obviously we saw inflation really beginning to emerge. And, you know, my compensation team, or ex-Alexis compensation team, they do reassess the market every year. And from that 12-month period, they did see a spike in base salaries across the board, not just in, you know, the legal area. And, you know, I'm skipping points, but certainly, you know, non-tech industries paying lower. I mean, when you work in, let's say, biotech, right, that's a highly regulated industry. So there's bigger risk, of course. Tech, I can see there's also IP, data protection as well. Mm-hmm. So it makes sense that those that are working in high tech or bio risk and responsibilities, that those type of positions would pay more in the legal realm.
Yeah.
So I'll comment on the third bullet. Unfortunately, I was not surprised about the annual bonus skewing lower. I think it's something that, you know, we as a community need to work on. And you'll just, even looking across companies, you'll see that those who complain the most often get rewarded for complaining. And us as a community, you know, just, it's a combination of timing and making sure your manager knows, assuming that you're confirming with them that you're performing well, and making sure they know that you have the expectation that you will hit your target. And if not, that they should give you a heads up and what you need to work on. And this should be something that is part of your, if you have a quarterly check-in, official check-in, or mid-year, that you just have that. It's often difficult, but frank discussion so that they're aware as they get close to bonus time. Oh yeah, there is this expectation and they are performing well and I therefore need to meet it. So don't be afraid to step up and test that. It is uncomfortable initially, but the more you do it, you know, the better you'll get at it.
Yeah.
And I think culturally, you know, Asian Americans are not told to self-advocate, but I am telling you, self-advocate. You got to do it. And then, you know, get your sponsors too, not just, oh, I'm great, which doesn't have as much credibility as if you have someone and you have to win over important people in senior management to advocate for you. And that's how you get this. That's how you get money that is not pre-allocated. Like a base is only in a certain range, but bonus is flexible. They got to spread it out. There's only a given pie. So to get that piece, you need to know how it works. And it's not just based on absolute merit and achievements, because if people don't know about it, they're not going to award it to you. Or if they don't like you, then they're not going to award it to you. So those are all things that Asian American attorneys need to think about hard.
Yeah, if your company has timely feedback, make sure that it's just not your peer group, providing your manager with that feedback. But also, if you are able to get that timely feedback, it's something that your manager can lever in justifying your allocation of your bonus as well.
Exactly.
So what I'm hearing is a lot of kind of empowerment here, that folks should be able to advocate for themselves and also, proactively negotiate their compensation. And I kind of want to use what I've heard from our panelists here to talk a little bit also about our next slide. On this slide, we see that more candidates were successful in negotiating equity in 2024 and 2025, as opposed to 2022 and 2023. And in that survey, we saw most folks were successful in negotiating base salary. So I'm curious to hear from all of our panelists again. Can you tell us what does this indicate about the industry landscape? Do you have any tips for us in terms of negotiation? And I want to hear a little bit about any specific way that you suggest we approach negotiation. Is there also a right time to stop negotiating so we don't leave a bad taste in our future employer's mouth? And lastly, we talked a lot about different aspects of compensation here, but if an employer is telling me that my base, bonus, and equity are all set in stone and they're immovable, what other levers can I pull as a candidate to get an ideal package?
I can start, so I'd say that, after being in recruiting for 25 years, compensation becomes less of a taboo subject. And I feel that people are a little more emboldened, which is good. It goes back to what you said about, self-advocating. When I approach a candidate who's applied for a position or I'm trying to actively recruit, I do bring up compensation at the beginning and with respect to understanding their, base salary expectations at least, And then right there, since the recruiter brought it up, then candidates should feel free to talk more openly about this subject, right? Before, a candidate advance further along into the interview process, which is time consuming, can be multiple rounds of phone interviews and, on-site interviews. I think it's important to understand what the company can provide, right? Otherwise, if it doesn't make financial sense and you are the primary breadwinner for the family, end it there. So it's important to establish that up front. If the recruiter doesn't bring it up in the initial call, maybe there's a reason why, but I would say that again, before you advance even to the on-site interview stage, it should be addressed. Otherwise, if you're looking for, I don't know, base of 300,000, they're looking to do 200, that's a huge gap. And that misunderstanding should be a misunderstanding by the time you get to the offer stage, right? Yeah.
Unfortunately, in California and New York, right, they do post now the base salary. So if that seems artificially low to you, so at Uber, our bases are known to be on the lower end, but we are focused on total compensation. So try and understand what ideally the recruiter starts and gives you that compensation discussion in the beginning about the philosophy and the approach and the breakout. So in rough terms, so that you are aware of what your structure will look like. And if you do need to make an adjustment on the base, how they can help you with it. I would say that it's rare that the base, bonus, and equity from the get-go are set in stone. There is flexibility, but you got to figure out, is it the signing bonus or the equity? And it depends on the time of year. It depends on how much equity the companies are, how much they're getting feedback from the board, and how much they use equity for compensation. So it shifts constantly. But I would say based on oftentimes in most companies, hopefully they try and use it as, that there's parity among peers. And the differentiation is really on the bonus, which is driven by that year's performance. And then the refresh is driven by, how they view their future at that company. Yeah. So base and bonus, I would say is, from my experiences, has less flexibility. There's minimal. There might be, a very small percent on the base, and then equity and signing bonus is where the flexibility.
And Roshni, you had asked, how many times can you go back?
Yeah.
I mean, try to keep it at 1, sometimes 2 for cleanup. More than that, you will drive everyone crazy and it will leave a bad taste in people's mouths. And then here's my number 1 tip for you guys. When you negotiate this, you have to tell the company that you really want to join, because no one's going to go to bat for you. No one on the HR team, the manager, if they don't think you're actually going to join, they think you're just gaming the system. So you have to authentically want to join, but you also need to tell them that. And then, as everyone said, you got to figure out, where do you have flexibility? Where does the company have flexibility? And then have your numbers to justify whether it's you have multiple offers elsewhere, your old company, what money you're walking away from, all the things that Herman had listed out before.
Yeah. Interesting. So thank you all for your responses. And I actually would like to get away from just the slides even for a second. And I want to ask a couple of other questions. Angela, you brought up a really great point. The fact that companies now need to include a salary range when they're posting a job description. Can any of our panelists here opine about how that might change things for a prospective candidate? Does, it seems like the obvious answer is that it would give a prospective candidate a little bit more leverage. Is that in fact correct?
I mean, a little bit. Sometimes the range is crazy though. It's like so gigantic that you can tell the company's gaming the system and it's not very helpful. But I would say, the clients I work with, they're usually, you can see it and it kind of gives you leverage because, for example, if you hit all the boxes, you can say, well, because I am the more senior person in this range and I have done all these things, I should get the higher end of this range. And I've seen many people use that argument nicely and it works.
Yeah.
Okay. I do want to offer that the reason why, well, at least one reason why the range can be quite broad is we know they have to cover multiple regions of the US. We do that at Exelixis, right? And so there are different grades or tiers because there are different cost of labor. Obviously in the Bay Area, it's much higher. So ideally it'd be on the higher end of the spectrum, right? But there are other things too, not just market data that, companies have to factor in. It's also internal comparators, right? So if one is applying for a senior manager role and there are other senior managers in the same department, right, with more experience, it's not feasible for someone with less experience to be making much more than those in-house, right? Or the internal comparators, I should say. Yeah.
Interesting. Okay. You know what? I have a different question. So we've talked a lot about negotiating an offer when we're going into a new job. But I'm actually curious to know how would you suggest that things change for a candidate like myself when I'm not changing jobs? Maybe I'm going into my annual review with my manager and I want to ask for a raise or more equity or things like that. Can any of you share your tactics or your advice on how I can approach that conversation, but also maintain a good relationship with my current employer and manager? I see everyone smiling on this one.
I mean, I would say not it because I help people get the initial job and I'm not there to so I will let the other experts comment on this.
That can be obviously a sensitive and tricky topic. So there are annual performance reviews that we hold at Exelixis, and I know that's what many companies have as well. That's where with feedback from your peers, yourself advocating on your review, that really is going to be one of the bigger influencers of how your merit increase will be, or even being considered for promotions, right?
Yeah.
To ask your boss for a raise because you're doing all this, great. But it's more than the boss can or your manager can do, because there are, promotional review committees. Compensation has to go through a process as well. There are other, comparators as also. So that isn't as straightforward, but I would say to start is, again, don't be idle tongue about your accomplishments. Really justify why you should be getting a raise or a promotion, right? If feel like you're not being developed to get to the spot where you will be earning more, getting promoted, that's where you need to take advantage of a one-on-one and really hold your manager accountable and say, what can I do to get to the next level? There's nothing wrong with being ambitious. I wouldn't say I want to make more money. It's like, I want to be developed further. I would love to be promoted to the next level. What does it look like for me? What's that path? And what do I need? What are the measurables?
Yeah.
Do those, and it should be recognized, and the money will follow, right? That's a logical, professional way of approaching that.
Okay.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think this is a great time to be discussing this or thinking about it, right? As you're going through year-end review and you're pulling together your self-assessment as well as feedback you've gotten from people that you've worked with, and knowing your manager and what's important to them and how you've contributed to the goals of the team or the responsibilities of your role and how you've gone beyond what is expectations, right? That's what would drive their justification among their peer group as they're pounding the table for you on why you should be one of the higher rated and therefore compensated individuals on the team. So the more you can help your manager justify you being ranked a top performer, the easier it'll be for you. And so if it doesn't come out the way you want when you get your bonus in first quarter or whenever, that is also a great time to put together the plan for this coming year, right? Obviously, I didn't, wasn't meeting what was exceeded expectations. What can I do in this year? And have a clear idea or plan, an agreement and alignment with your manager so that, and through your quarterly check-ins or your monthly meetings, or, make sure you spend the time, just not on the day-to-day, but on the bigger plan. So we talk about, this is how I was going to develop, how, either look for your own opportunities. I'm thinking about doing this. What, can you support me on that? Or if there's a project coming up, offer to take the lead on that, right? That is beyond your day-to-day expectation of you and your role. And that would therefore allow them and others to see you as a top performer on the team.
Yeah.
And to piggyback on that, I would say you have to have your I Love Me file. So whenever someone emails you, great job, Roshni, I saw you closed XYZ, forward that to your file. And so at the end of the year, you have all your metrics and accolades together and you're not like racking your brain. What the heck did I do?
That's a great idea. I'm going to go make that folder right now.
Yeah, forward it to your manager.
Yeah. Hey, Susan, I actually want to go back for a second to what you said when I asked that last question. What you said was, well, you help folks get their jobs and then that's where you leave them. And I want to juxtapose that with the roles that Herman has at his company, Exelexis, and Angela, who formerly worked at Uber, who are internal recruiters. Mm-hmm. So I'm curious if you all can tell me actually a little bit, what is the role of a recruiter? And I also want to know, is it important for me to get on your good side when I'm negotiating an offer? And if so, how do I do that? And I think the answer might maybe be different for you, Susan, as an external recruiter, as opposed to Herman and Angela, but I'd be curious to hear what your thoughts are.
Okay, so as the external recruiter, I am a vendor that has jumped through all the hoops and has a signed agreement with my client, the company, to help them find people. Sometimes people think I can get people any job anywhere, like a real estate agent can represent them for any house. No, I have to have an agreement with that company, and that company is my client. You, the lawyer, you're a candidate, right? So I'm assessing you. So it is important for you to be on my good side, because everything you say to me, I am bound to tell my client, right? So if you're like, I hate my boss, these terrible things happen to me, I have to tell the client this is how the person presents. So, keep that in mind. And then how important am I in the process? I mean, if a company hires me to go find someone, then I'm partnering with the Hermans and the Angelas in-house, and we work hand in hand. They tell me we're looking for X, Y, and Z. I find people with these, or I say the market doesn't show that. What can we trade off? So the external recruiter works with the internal recruiter.
Mm-hmm. It sounds like it's important to give a good impression to the recruiter as well, because it sounds like for all three of you, if a hiring manager has selected you either internally or externally to help with filling their role, they probably have a good amount of trust that they put in you. And so if I give you a bad impression, I wouldn't be surprised if you pass that along. And, that's the impression that the hiring manager also has of me.
Right.
Yeah,
that's
I would
correct.
say you want as many advocates as you can, right? Some people see recruiters as just administrative and person and will treat us accordingly. And, our role is to be a facilitator too. So we're not going to purposely discount someone because of that if they have all the appropriate and the hiring manager is interested, right? But if things do go sideways, then it's just a data point for us. So I would say, everyone you meet, whether it's a recruiting coordinator who brings you in and gets you settled, I always ask them how to go, what are they like, to get their thoughts, as well as the hiring managers, so that it's other data points and interactions. And it's also a good time for you to assess the company as well, right? The people that you're interacting with, are these people, the culture, are these people that you are excited to partner with? And when you're hiring for your team, are these people that you would want to work with? So I would say, see everyone as someone that can advocate for you in hopefully a positive manner, and also give you insight on what you're getting yourself into.
Yeah.
I just would say that how well or poorly a candidate may treat a recruiter will give pause on a hiring manager, because they will think like, well, if you treated the recruiter like this, how are you going to treat a colleague here if you were to work here?
Mm-hmm.
And so that is a reflection of what a candidate says and does, a reflection of them as a person.
Yeah.
So just bear that in mind. And I know of an incident here where the candidate was great, had stellar skills, but treated the recruiting coordinator very poorly. And they decided not to hire that person because they were concerned that, well, that person was rude to this one individual. I can't put this person in front of a VP.
Yeah. That makes sense. And I think this is a great time actually for me to say, I have 2 more questions for our panelists. And then after those 2 questions, we're going to move into a Q&A session where we're going to take some questions from our viewers. If you have any questions for our panelists, please drop them into the chat and I'll call those questions out just shortly. But before we actually get into that, I have one more question. Or I should say I have 2 more questions, but I'll start with this one. So how important is, my resume? And I ask that because now there are a couple of different components. I mean, I know that recruiters are looking at my LinkedIn profile as well. So how important is building and writing my resume? And are folks going to be looking at my LinkedIn, or is there any specific weight between the 2 that I should place?
I mean, both are important. They should not contradict each other. So your LinkedIn is probably more general and your resume is more tailored to show exactly how you can do the job. So you should have like one standard resume, but then you need to tailor it for every job. For your LinkedIn, you kind of leave it as is, and you probably want to speak to your higher skills, like I draft and negotiate these kinds of agreements. I'm a closer. I counsel these cross-functional teams. Here are some effective things I've done. And then your resume needs to get very specific.
Got it.
And then always have a picture on your LinkedIn profile. I just talked to someone today who's not on LinkedIn. And I even asked them, why are you not on LinkedIn? Because it's just so unusual if you're not.
Yeah.
Yeah, I would say while we send the resumes to hiring managers, oftentimes they'll just look, and we also send the LinkedIn, they'll look at the LinkedIn, they're like, why, if they have a resume, but no LinkedIn, they'll be like, why don't they have a LinkedIn? And it's just, I think because it's a standard format that people are just used to, like 2 minutes before they go in, they look at it quickly, they can get what they want out of it. The biggest piece of advice I give people when they ask about their resume or LinkedIn is don't use it as a job description. Really focus on highlights, like things you're proud of, things you have a cool story, a 2-minute story that highlight your achievement, like what the objective was, the achievement, and your part that really distinguish you or differentiate you from others.
Oh, okay. Interesting.
I would add that when writing a resume, I agree with Susan, customize it per the job, like actually read the job description. What my biggest pet peeve is when someone takes their own job description at their current company and just copies and pastes it right in the resume. I mean, it reads like a job description. I mean, I'll still read it. If it's great, I'll still send it. But what I like to see in a resume is not only what you've done, but what has been the outcome, what's been the result, right?
Mhm.
If you improved efficiencies, great. If you cut down turnaround time on contracts review, what was it from 10 days to 2 days? Great. So it's not just what you've done, but how have you done it, how you achieved it. That's more impactful than just said process documents or, worked with my manager on various projects. That's not very meaningful.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. I want to tie together a couple of the things that I heard you all say. I want to get a little bit more, actually, Herman, I want you to tell me more of your pet peeves. Because, I know that Herman, you and Angela both work, with candidates all across the board, not necessarily only attorneys. And I want to know from all three panelists, is there anything that lawyers tend to do that's special or different from other types of candidates? And I mean, are those good things or are they bad things? Do you have any pet peeves or do you have any, particular compliments when it comes to attorneys as well?
My concern, I'll be very honest. When my manager had me start working for legal about 3 years ago, I was like, what are you talking about? So unfortunately, I did have a bit of a stereotype about lawyers, but now I can confidently say that actually my favorite client group and my favorite candidates, because I find lawyers to be very to the point, direct, professional. They know how to hold a discussion and they know how to negotiate. I contrast that with, also recruiting scientists with PhDs or, bioinformatics, engineers. They're a different phenotype, right? But I really enjoy discussions with, lawyers because they have worked, whether it be in a firm that are very client facing or in-house where they know how to deal with difficult negotiations, right? So I honestly have nothing but praise for in working with, candidates who are attorneys and also just my, client group legal affairs. I mean, really, really warm, personable people. So yeah, can't say anything negative,
Okay, that's good to hear.
Yeah.
What about you, Angela or Susan? Anything to add?
Yeah. So I agree. I always that's my team. When there is a new recruiter, I'll often give them legal and finance because the client base is very straightforward, client facing often, and definitely more straightforward in the recruiting process. I would say my background's mainly been at executive, and I thought everyone did this, but I mentioned it when we were prepping, right? At the more senior levels, probably because people have had different situations where they felt they were taken advantage of, or there were certain situations. But one thing I brought up was not to redline the employment agreement. So I guess if you're in corporate or commercial and you're used to redlining all the time, these employment agreements are pretty standard. You can look at the 10Ks, DF 14A, and look at the compensation agreement across the executives, but they're pretty consistent. So don't spend your time or ask them to run it through legal, because you have asked, but the feedback we'll get is like, who is this person? Why are they doing this?
Yeah.
And then makes them question the fit, right? That they've gotten this far on appropriateness. So,
yeah.
But in terms of pet peeve, I would say listen to your recruiters. If your recruiters tell you that's really not a topic that is open for discussion and you can't continue to push it or talk to the hiring manager, we're trying to help you. So it's not that we're trying to stall you or prevent you from having a discussion that's important to you. Just take it with a grain of salt.
Yeah.
I've seen situations that have blown up because they've decided to take it straight to the hiring manager. Right? Were the top candidate and quickly fell off the list after that.
Yeah.
But otherwise, just otherwise, not much else on the pet peeve.
What I would add is lawyers want to tell me the whole story, beginning to end. And it's like, You got to remember who your audience is and keep it really short. No backstory. Just 3-sentence stories. This is what happened. This is what I did. These are the results. And I said, that's the length of the story. And sometimes if I let lawyers go for 20 minutes, they'll still be making the same point. So I guess that's my only tip.
And if we want more details, we'll ask.
Yes.
All right. Okay. Well, let me go ahead. We're now going to enter some of our Q&A portion. I'm going to wrap us up on the rest of the slides. We have 2 more slides I just want to walk through quickly. In the meantime, I ask our viewers to please add some more questions into the chat for us to ask of our panelists. And I do want to also note that Angela is going to have to jump off in about 10 minutes. So if you have any specific questions for Angela, please go ahead and add those into the chat now, and I'll take them first. So as you can see here, we wanted to give a huge shout out and thank you to the folks who worked on the survey that are listed there at the top: Marty, David, Gabe, Hamilton, Krithi, Vincent, Susan, and Sherman. Again, thank you so much for all of your work on the survey in the past 5 months. We've been cranking. And I also want to give a shout out to all of our co-marketing sponsors that are listed here at the bottom half of the slide. The portion that I know you all are interested in is the actual report. So a detailed report will be sent out to all of the respondents of the survey who provided an email address, and it will also be available to paid members of AVA Bay Area and APAVA Silicon Valley. If you have any questions, we've got this email address located at the bottom of the slide. And lastly, just a note that this presentation was just for illustrative purposes. It should only be accessed by folks who have either responded to the survey or who are part of AVA Bay Area or APAVA Silicon Valley. So it's not intended for public distribution. Please keep it confidential. And given that was the last slide, I'm going to go ahead and launch us into some Q&A. I don't see any specific questions for Angela yet, so I will just go ahead and start with our first question. One of our viewers is wondering, Krithi is wondering, how do you navigate a situation where you've been upfront with a recruiter about your needs for compensation, and they still bring you a ridiculous offer? Like, for example, it's almost $50,000 below your current base. How would you navigate that?
So I would assume the total comp is also not close to your expectations, and just be polite and thank them and sign them off. I would be embarrassed to do that, but maybe you have other thoughts.
Yeah, for me, I would, if I were you, I'd like to understand why, right? So how did they come to that figure, right? Are they using the right market data, right? Is there internal comparators with similar experience that aren't making that, right? So understanding the why will go a long way, so then you can kind of question and maybe even challenge or negotiate that. But again, if they're that far off, right, and you were up front and the recruiter didn't have any objections, then you have to question, are they being fair and equitable, or being competitive? Mm-hmm. And if that's not the salary you want, move on. Yeah.
So if I were the external recruiter and I was giving this number to the person, I would probably try to explain and give a little bit of context. But yeah, you might just need to walk away then.
Yeah. Okay, well, I'm going to move on to another question that we received from Irene. Irene was asking if our panelists could share strategies around negotiating parental leave, particularly for candidates who may be seeking an exception from a 12-month service requirement for eligibility.
I assume that 12-month service means you have to be with the company employed for a year, right? Mm-hmm.
That's the way I'm reading it.
Yeah. I think this goes back to something that we touched on, is that, benefits are pretty much, non-negotiable. I know that in some cases for like medical leave, I know of situations where people had to use their vacation or their sick leave to extend, but usually, I don't, from my experience, I don't think there is a way to negotiate that benefit, because if you think about an offer, right, there's a compensation piece and then there's benefits piece. Compensation, there can be room for negotiation, but with benefits, they're equal because they're not based on merit, seniority, or level. That's what compensation is, right? Benefits are same for everybody. You're a new employee, you get the same benefits irrespective of your level. So I don't think you can, but Susan or Angela, if you know situations, please prove me wrong. Yeah.
I think if you have this situation and you probably know about it prior to while you're in the process, I would bring it up sooner than later. I've had candidates bring very upfront that they were X number of months pregnant and needed to know what the parental leave and if they were comfortable with their current state. So fortunately at Uber, we had unlimited PTO as well as a generous parental leave. So there have been people who came for like a month and then were gone for the parental leave soon after.
Mhm.
But it is something that you can go on blind and look at and get data points, or I would say similar to what, it is a benefit. So there are, we try and be consistent right across the company, but there are always occasional rare exceptions. And that would be on, up to the hiring managers and their managers' discretion on how they want to approach it.
Thank you. I'm going to move on to another question that we received from Krithi. And she's wondering, what are some of the most memorable questions that candidates have asked you during an initial role scoping conversation? Anything I'm also curious to hear the responses to this question.
I mean, I don't get asked the scoping question, so I can.
I don't think there's many like outlandish or embarrassing questions. I will focus on like one of the better questions to ask, and it's really trying to understand the team culture and dynamic, because there's that personal aspect of being very inquisitive, not just on the job functions, right? I also like it when I kind of ask, what are the challenges that the department is facing, and how can I be an asset? And when they do ask that question, I will explain what the challenge is. Then I'll turn around and saying, what do you think, how would you handle this type of challenge? What would you do coming in? So I'll turn it on them, So those would be really, solid questions I think should be standard in with any candidate, especially if you're gunning for a, more senior level role.
Yeah.
Yeah, I would agree that I think some of the best questions to ask is, what happened to the, why is this role available? Oftentimes someone's moved on, oftentimes they're up leveling or they're down leveling. So just understanding what you're getting yourself into in the situation. Is there a team? How is the team dynamics? Is there a headcount to support the growth of the team? If there are expectations, right, that of growth and certain goals that are meant to be achieved by end of year. So yeah, really just understanding what beyond the job description, right, and your fit, but how it fits into where you would thrive, and also your long-term ambition. So what you've done so far, you really can't change, but in terms of your next step, you have control over that. So you want to make sure that the role you're going into, while it may compensate you a lot more, really does, if that is, of course, that's always nice, but if it does advance your career for the long term.
I think one more thing to say is that since a recruiter may not know everything about the position, but it obviously is in close contact with the hiring manager. So the candidate can ask questions to us that we can relay to the hiring manager and get back to them. right? So go into the interview thinking like, I'm talking to someone who could be my future manager. What would be the most pressing questions? And if I can't answer it, I'll be sure to relay it to the hiring leader.
Interesting. Okay, I want to get into our next question, but before we do that, I think it's about time that we probably need to bid farewell to our panelist, Angela. So thank you so much, Angela, for joining us, and we really appreciate your time today.
Thanks all. See you
Bye,
soon.
Angela.
All right, thank you. So I'm now going to get into the next question, and this is the last question that we received in the chat. So if you have anything further, please go ahead and add it into the chat now so we can go ahead and ask Susan and Herman to provide a response. But I do want to get into this one. So this is a really, I think, timely question. What should you do when applying for a job after a layoff? You might still technically be employed, but you have a couple months severance. Should you be posting on LinkedIn that you were impacted by a layoff? I've seen a couple of those posts, lately. Any particular take on this, Herman and Susan?
I would say the most conservative thing to do is just leave that you're there at that company, because you are there at that company. They're still paying you. You're on payroll. Then there's oh, go ahead.
Oh, sorry. I don't know if you were done. There was a pause. Go ahead, Susan. Yeah.
I was just thinking there's the whole controversy of, do you do the open to work banner or not? I probably wouldn't. I mean, supposedly recruiters could just sort through people, but I never look at that. So I don't think it's particularly helpful to do that. I mean, you should be networking like crazy, but just throwing it out there in the world and hoping people respond, like, I've been laid off, help me. Like, I don't think it's as good as being targeted. Like, these are 5 companies or industries I'm interested in. Here are the friends that I know, people who are related to those industries. Let me ping them individually. I think that's much more effective.
Yeah.
I mean, I would agree in that, it'd certainly be aggressive in your job search, right? Don't hope that someone will find your great profile. I'm indifferent to if you put down that you're open to work, because there are some recruiters that do look for that. But again, if you have a great profile on LinkedIn and it in a sense kind of sells itself, they will find you, right? And with so many layoffs, I don't think it matters if you know that you were, laid off. It's so commonplace now. I don't see that as being a deal breaker or making someone less attractive, right? You got to eat, you got to feed yourself, so do what you can, right? But also bear in mind that, well, from my perspective, I feel like LinkedIn has become more of like a social media ground. So you want to be mindful of what you do post, right? Because that can be a reflection of who you are, what you're putting out in the world. So I would just say, be mindful of how you present and comment and post, because it is public information.
Yeah. I've definitely seen some questionable things on LinkedIn.
Yeah. Hopefully that's helpful. Yeah.
Thank you. Susan and Herman, it looks like that was the last question that we got from our viewers. So I'll give you a moment if there are any final remarks that you'd like to share, but otherwise I think we can move towards wrapping this panel up.
Well, I wanted to say the reason why Roshni and I and the other members did this compensation report, I think it's a great service for all you, and I hope you are able to use it, because how are you able to negotiate is when you have data, right? And then you know where you stand, and then you can probably negotiate for a living. The more data you have, validated data, the better. And I don't know of any other bar association that has focused on in-house compensation. And so this is hyper specific to us, Bay Area in-house counsel, in very large numbers, 250. So I hope it's helpful for you all.
Thanks, Susan. I couldn't agree more. But since we still have you two for another couple of minutes, and we had another question come in, I'm going to take full advantage of the next couple of minutes. And I want to bring up this question we received from Neil. What are the red flags that I should notice as a candidate prior to even applying for a position? And what do you do as recruiters to not try and scare candidates off? Kind of related to that, how can I tell the difference between high turnover rate and a rapidly expanding company if I'm constantly seeing the same job position pop up, which I personally see that a lot on LinkedIn, but I'm not sure if, are you hiring more, or did something go wrong?
I mean, it could be many, many situations. Some of my clients leave a post up because they're hiring so many of the same because they are rapidly growing. And then in the last couple of years, because of such volatility, they could post it, but then there's been a reorg or this group moves around. So then that's why it's been on the market a long time. So it's it depends. And how do you get to the truth? You have to ask people. So the more people you are helpful to authentically, then they're going to want to help you when you have random questions. So I guess my answer is just be a kind person and as helpful as possible. And that's how the universe will help you later when you need to assess a question like that. And then the second part, what do you as recruiters try not to do to scare candidates off? Again, it's the personal connection. Because if you don't know me from anyone, like, why are you going to take my call, right? But if someone says, hey, you should talk to Susan and here's why, and it's someone you trust, then that's how I not scare people away. It's through my known persona, like as a person in the community. And then I also post on LinkedIn and my website, like helpful bits on what I am seeing, trends, and also negotiation tactics or comments on the in-house community that I think people will find beneficial. So if they can diligence me and then they could see that I'm a legit person, who knows what they're talking about.
Okay.
I mean, on my end, I mean, to about a high turn rate and rapidly expanding company, it's hard to tell. There's so many inner workings of an organization, you just don't know, right? I mean, if I hire like multiple corporate counsels, right, it just could be a need, attrition, right? That's going to happen. I think the market's like 18%, on average. So I would say it's important to be selective, but don't be overly cautious and defeat yourself. If you think it's a great opportunity, apply. When you get to, let's say, a phone interview stage, then probe more, right? That's your open door to research more by asking questions, right?
Yeah.
Build a network so you have maybe some insights through, third parties in that respect. Red flags with a company, right? I mean, one thing that concerns me is if they don't post, the salary band, right? Mm-hmm. And they're being kind of, cagey about it. Yeah. If it's a lot, it should be posted.
Yeah.
I actually think it's great that company does post it because it's all about being fair and equitable, irrespective of, race, religion, and gender, right? Mm-hmm. So if they don't, to me, that's a red flag, Sometimes you could also go on Glassdoor, but I would take that with a grain of salt, right? Because people love to complain more than love to, be positive, right? And if a person is complaining today, all right, who made you angry that day and why, So yeah, I did see that, but I would just use that as a bit of one of many things to potentially factor into a role, right? Yeah. The best resources are people, right? So if you can connect with someone who used to work at that and you can engage them, ask for their experience. But again, their experience may differ. They may have worked on a different leader or department, right? So again, going back to Susan, people are the best resource, not what you read online or necessary data. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. It looks like our viewers do have a couple more questions for us, so we're going to take up all of the time of yours that we can get. I next want to move on to a question from Madhuri, and she's wondering, can you share any insights regarding non-practicing roles? What are the roles that have the best growth and or the greatest compensation potential?
You mean non-legal?
I take this as maybe you are an attorney, but you're not working in an attorney practicing position. So you might be
like non-litigation or things
expert, like that. Or an immigration manager, something that might be legal adjacent, but is not necessarily a role where you're practicing the law.
So I see a lot of lawyers from M&A go into BD. So you just go to the business side of what you're supporting. Or if you're an employment lawyer, maybe you go into HR. If you're a privacy lawyer, you go into compliance. So usually it's an adjacency.
Yeah.
I would say in terms of, lucrative opportunities, IP licensing in a tech or biotech company within Exelixis are some of the more higher paying roles. I have a licensing position, and they're looking for someone not with a JD, but with a PhD in life sciences, right? So those are two, very high degrees. And you can get that experience in a legal firm and hopefully leverage that and go in-house. So what else can be there?
Management consulting. I've seen people do that.
Yes.
iBanking. Found a company, take your chances. I don't know if it's high paying or not. Or like legal ops. There were a lot of legal ops companies, and they took people.
Right.
Also company type too, right? So, with a bigger company, you're going to maybe a little bit more siloed. But with maybe a smaller organization, you might be more exposed to a variety of things and be more rounded. And you do that several times throughout your career at different positions, you become more like the head of legal, or even maybe a GC in that respect, right? Yeah.
Okay. Thank you. I have one more question here, and it's from Troy. Troy is wondering if you have any feedback on trends towards fractional general counsel roles versus a straight up in-house counsel role.
I mean, I see a lot of people going the fractional route when they're very senior, and they have clients coming to them. So say the person is very senior in a company, departs the company for whatever reason, and they have clients coming to them. It's very easy to go into a fractional GC role. And there's a big fractional market. The Wall Street Journal did a huge story on this, on like CMOs, fractional chief marketing officers. There's a lot of people at the executive level that can do this. Why do people do it? It could be lifestyle. It could be they can't find that senior job. So as a recruiter, this isn't quite the question, but how do I evaluate that? I think it's positive. They're doing something in the time between a job, an in-house job, and their next in-house job, and they want to show they're doing something very relevant. And sometimes that fractional job can turn into their next GC gig as their company grows bigger.
Yeah. Interesting. Okay. Well, since we have 5 more minutes, I actually want to talk about a question that came in, but it didn't come in through the YouTube chat. We actually got a question through text message, and I'm curious to know from our panelists, are you allowed to ask a recruiter or hiring manager before you accept an offer? Are you allowed to ask them what the MRR band is for the role? And I'm actually curious, I don't know what that is. Can one of you tell us what an MRR band is? And I would love to also know your thoughts about whether it's okay to ask about that.
I mean, is it leveling? Yeah, you can ask me what the leveling is. If I know, I'll tell you. I mean, I think it's fine. It's fine to know, like, at this title, it's at this level. What if I'm considered at the next level up? What is the band for that? I mean, if that's the question, sure, it's fine to ask, but it's how you ask nicely, show you are interested,
Okay.
So sorry, Herman, you were starting to answer that.
Oh, no, I had not heard that term before, but yeah, if it's on seniority and grade level, because maybe the candidate wants to understand what is the career path at a company. Mm-hmm. Sure. Yeah. To me, it shows interest, but I don't see any objections to providing that. Yeah.
Okay. Well, in that case, thank you so much, both Susan and Herman and Angela, who had to leave us, for all of your insights. We really appreciate your time. As Susan mentioned earlier, one of the biggest reasons why we conduct the survey and release the results is to increase transparency around compensation and also reduce the stigma around these conversations. We hope that some of the tips that you heard today will help you with negotiating your offers or current refreshes of offers. And we will, like I said, be sending out the actual compensation report shortly to candidates to respondents of the survey and to members of ABA Bay Area and APABA Silicon Valley. Thank you so much for joining us this evening, and have a great night.
Everybody.